Hi everyone, today I'm going to be presenting my Freezing Pulse League Starter Guide for patch 3.15 Expedition League. Throughout the last month of 3.14, I spent almost every day rigorously testing new League Starter options, and I settled upon this one as I felt it was overall the best budget League Starter, and fortunately, it wasn't nerfed nearly as hard as all the other League Starters I had prepared. One of the main reasons why you should play this build is because it can clear almost the entire endgame on a ridiculously low budget of less than 1 Exalt, whereas other League starters require at least a few Exalts thanks to this build's ability to switch between using Freezing Pulse and Ice Spear for clearing and bossing respectively. In fact, in the description of this video I have a link to a Deathless Cirrus 9 kill using the 40C budget PoB recommended in this guide for those who want to see for themselves, as well as a link to my forum guide which offers a far more detailed breakdown of what I'm about to present in this video. One quick disclaimer before we jump into things however, this build has had its DPS nerfed by approximately 37 to 39% with the 3.15 nerfs. This isn't a particularly big deal because this build already has an absurd amount of damage and a lot of perks such as Cursed Immunity and being able to safely automate damage from a distance, so I would still highly recommend it as a powerful League starter in 3.15 and I currently plan to League start this build myself. We level this character up as Armageddon Brand and Cremation, and then we transition to Totems much later on in maps basically. The reason we do this is because the Armageddon Brand and Cremation setup is really efficient at reaching maps as fast as possible, and it also allows you to then begin mapping as fast as possible without having to reconfigure your gear or go buy uniques. If you rely on a totem-based approach to this, you're going to spend a few extra hours in order to get to maps, and then once you get to maps, you then have to clear maps quite slowly until you can acquire your first few uniques to get the build going. This setup is much more efficient, and I've modified the typical racing setup so that once you're ready to transition to Totems, you only have to spend about 10 refund points, which is pretty much what you're getting passively from completing the campaign anyway. My leveling PoB gives you an act-by-act breakdown of exactly how you want to be spending your points as you work through, all the way to Act 10. And the skill section also provides an act-by-act breakdown of all the gems that you want to be taking. So you basically start off with Holy Flame Totem and Flame Wall with Stormblast Mine for bosses, and then you pretty much keep adding to that setup all the way up to Act 3. At Act 3 you attain Armageddon Brand and Cremation, and then you can slowly start ditching the Act 1 and 2 setup. By the time you're in Act 6, you have 2 full links, which is Armageddon Brand with Ignite, Prolif, Combustion, and Immolate, and then Cremation with Controlled Destruction, LE Focus, and Pinpoint. Now, something to keep in mind is that you can find a written explanation of all this in the notes section, and in the notes section is also contained a list of the gems that you want to be purchasing in Act 6 from Lily. Now, I really recommend you give this a good, thorough read, and you keep it in mind when you are League starting. This basically explains which gems you want to be buying off Lily and then leveling up in anticipation of your transition to Totems much later on, even though I would recommend transitioning to Totems around midway through YOLO maps. You're going to want these gems all leveled up by the time you get there. You don't want to start having, Ice Spear and Freezing Pulse at level 1 when you're, ready to start playing it. So I would recommend just buying these and throwing them in a weapon swap and then getting them leveled up pretty much as early as possible. And then this also explains what you want to probably be looking into buying in Act 10 in anticipation of your transition, but there is no particular rush on doing that. Now, one other thing to point out in all this is that I have provided an early transition. So basically, regarding the lab, you only really want to obtain Conviction of Power at the end of Act 3. You do this to gain Endurance and Power charges. The Endurance charges provide you all res and physical damage reduction, which is a big boost to your survivability early on, and the Power charges, although we don't really care about crit chance that much because we are running Elemental Overload, it does mean that you're going to have a higher uptime on your Elemental Overload, which is really important. However, since the next 2 labs that we obtain are totem-based labs, you don't really care about obtaining these by the end of the campaign, and in fact you can delay doing the next 2 labs all the way up till you are ready to transition to Totems about midway through YOLO maps. So you could basically just, once you're in YOLO maps and you're ready to do your transition, you do these labs, get Pursuit of Faith and Ritual of Awakening, and then you can do Uber Lab whenever you're ready, and that just adds a little bit of extra defense to the build, but also no rush on that. Now, something to keep in mind here is that this is the full transition once you've obtained the unique stuff, Terran's Shiver. However, if you want to do an earlier transition to Totems just because you like Totems, you enjoy the Totem playstyle, and you don't really enjoy Armageddon Brand, this is probably what you want to have, and then you would accompany that with fire damage based wands. Cold damage based wands. So I'm now going to provide a brief demonstration of Armageddon Brand and Cremation and how it performs in early maps. And the reason I'm going to do that is to sort of show you that you really aren't in any pressure to get totems off the ground as soon as possible. Armor Brand and Cremation will carry you right all the way through to yellow maps, and if you invest even a few C into better ones, you can easily get into red maps without having to worry about anything else. So here we have a freshly leveled character. I've just finished the campaign on it. We've ascended one time. We have no jewels. We have a very bare bones passive tree. We have absolute garbage weapons, garbage gear, and then I'm using a set of 4 links where we are using level 15 Armageddon Brand with level 15 Cremation. So we will just put a tier 8 map in, and I'll show you how that goes. Just keep in mind we aren't res capped. You know, this is literally just the character as it was when it finished the campaign. I haven't made any other changes. So as you can see, while it's not super comfortable, it's still getting the job done. And, you know, the fact that it can do tier 8 content kind of shows that at least by this time you'll be able to already transition to totems. There's no way you're ever going to make it as far as tier 8 before transitioning, but, you know, this is to show you that in some absolute worst case scenario where you can't transition, you know, the build functions completely fine when it's way out of its depth anyway. For those who want a more in-depth understanding of everything I've just explained, I'm uploading a leveling commentary video alongside this video. You can find the link for that in the description below as well, and that's just going to run you through Act 1 to 3, and that's pretty much when we get Armageddon Brand and Cremation set up, and you can sort of see how it functions, what sort of things you have to do to get there, and how to get to it as efficiently as possible. So you can find the link to the POB for the budget setup both in my actual forum guide and the description of this video, and although this is labeled as the day 1 budget totem setup, you should expect to have much better gear and DPS than this by the end of day 1 if you're playing even at a moderate pace. The POB does absolutely nothing special, and it's very similar to the leveling POB with just a few nodes changed around, so I'll just go through it real quick to show you the important things. So we pretty much come down here to get Light of Divinity and Holy Dominion, however we don't connect up to this part of the tree here since it's inefficient to do so. We come up here and we grab Mind Over Matter, we grab the life nodes here, we grab the jewel node here for one of our 3 jewels. We want to run Rain of Splinters, Self-Flagellation, and Clear Mind in this setup. It gives us a lot of increased damage, and something you may be wondering is why we don't run First Snow. The reason we don't run First Snow is because Rain of Splinters is a very significant DPS increase to our Ice Spear setup, and First Snow does not benefit Ice Spear at all. So by running Rain of Splinters, although it provides slightly less DPS with Freezing Pulse, it gives us vastly increased DPS with Ice Spear and doesn't put us in the position of having to change our jewels every time we want to kill a boss. So it's just much more efficient to run this setup. Now we come up here, we get life, we grab Frostwalker and Annihilation for the crit node. We come up here to grab Shaman's Dominion, Mental Rapidity. We want to run this Dex node so that we can meet attribute requirements later on. We come up here and we grab the Staff nodes, as these are very important. We run Disciple of the Forbidden in conjunction with Instability and the spell damage per power charge, and this basically allows us to have a 5th maximum power charge, a 5th minimum power charge, and then a bunch of actual damage bonuses for having power charges. So you have 8% increased damage per power charge here, and you have 4% increased spell damage per power charge here. So that's basically 12 times 5, or 60% increased damage from those nodes, as well as getting 25% crit multi and 40% increased crit chance. The mana regeneration is also a nice added touch, which we pick up a lot of throughout the trees. You can see some mana regen here, get mana regen here, and also from our Ascendancy. Now we come up here to grab Heart of Ice. We don't have a lot of cold penetration in this build, so it's really important to actually come up here and pick up this node. Pretty much we want to get the jewel slot here, and then we loop back around here for Arcane Potency, Purity of Flesh with the extra life nodes, Arcane Capacitor, since totems actually cost quite a lot of mana, and this bonus gets stacked up quite easily, as well as the increased maximum mana benefiting our Mind Over Matter setup. We want to run Ancestral Bond, of course, Divine Judgment, since it's just very efficient. Then we want to run the Staff nodes here, of course, paving through this way, since those are the better nodes for us, and then we come down here for Sanctum of Thought. We run Sanctum of Thought because combined with our Kikazara rings, we basically are immune to curses, and this build is basically a self-curse build. We self-curse as a result of Soul Mantle, which I'll run you through momentarily, but basically we want to be immune to curses. We are not a self-curse build in the sense that we run any benefit from it, it's rather a penalty applied from one of our uniques, and we don't want to be affected by that penalty at all. And this is pretty much the only way to gain immunity to curses whilst you're running the budget setup. Whilst the budget setup is not particularly gear intensive, the uniques that I'm about to show you are pretty much absolutely mandatory, as they make up a large part of our DPS, and without them the build is going to be completely ineffective and pretty much just not worth using at all. So to start off with is Soul Mantle, and the main two benefits of Soul Mantle are the level 20 Spell Totem support gem that we get for free, and the +1 number of maximum summon totems. Now, when you combine these two mods together, it's pretty much providing us with 46% of our damage compared to running a Tabula Rasa. So a 5-link Soul Mantle is vastly superior to pretty much any other 6-link that you're going to have access to, which makes this virtually mandatory. Now the other benefits to running Soul Mantle are the 50% increased totem life, which is going to keep your totems alive when you're versing Conquerors and other hard-hitting bosses, such as, 8 mod map bosses. And the other benefit is the self-curse mechanism. Although this is a penalty because we run self-flagellation as a jewel, we then get to get vastly increased amounts of damage just by having these curses on us, so it kind of works to our favor to have this on the Soul Mantle. Now, other than that, you want to run 2 Kikazaru rings. The Kikazaru rings each provide us with 40% reduced effect of curses on us, and that totals to 80%, combined with the Sanctum of Thought notable that I explained in our PoB setup. That's 100% reduced effect of curses on us. So 100% reduced means 0, and 80% more of 0, as you can see from the Soul Mantle, is still 0. This basically makes us completely immune to all curses, and that also has the added benefit that when you run, say, Temp Chains maps, you are not affected by curses at all in any way. On top of that, you're also getting some additional mana regen, which is really underrated. We run Mind Over Matter, so it's important to have a lot of mana regen in this build. We do run a mana flask as well to assist this, but just having passive mana regen really, it gives us a lot of extra defenses, which a lot of people don't account for. And because totems use up a lot of mana, we're going to run out of mana quickly, so it's pretty much mandatory to have a lot of sources of increased mana regen in our build. I'll just show you real quick now. As you can see, we would actually run through quite a lot of mana if not for the massive amounts of free mana regen we're picking up here. Now, on top of these 3 uniques, the only other unique that I really recommend is running Terran's Shiver. Terran's Shiver is giving us +2 to our level of Freezing Pulse or Ice Spear, and then it's also giving us a bunch of other really powerful mods, as well as 25% block chance. There is no other budget weapon that's going to come close to providing the kind of benefits that Terran's Shiver is going to provide, and in past leagues, this weapon has been a 1C weapon on day 1 of the league. In fact, Kikazarus are also 1C uniques, and Soul Mantle is typically around 5 to 10C early on in day 1. In fact, buying the 5-link Prophecy for Soul Mantle is going to be the bulk of the 40C budget that I've stated for this build. Now, in all your other slots of gear, you pretty much just want rare items with a priority on life and mana, and other than that, just enough resistance to hit your res cap. Using energy shield bases is pretty beneficial, however, it's not at all mandatory in any way. For the belt slot, I would really recommend using a Stygian Vice for the access to an Abyssal Jewel, but again, not mandatory. Using a leather belt is going to be absolutely fine as an alternative. And for your amulet, I would really recommend the Claws of Pride Anointment. Now, the reason we would do that is because it basically gives us 15% cast speed for 4 seconds whenever we use Flame Dash, or basically whenever we have Arcane Surge up, and we can have 100% uptime on this buff. It's a very cheap anointment, so I'll just show you real quick. The Claws of Pride notable down here. It costs us 2 violets and 1 orange oil, making it very easily obtainable on day 1. And then for your helm, you pretty much just want an Ice Spear enchant that grants 1 additional projectile. With the ideal Ice Spear setup, that's giving us about 12.5% more DPS, which is really strong as far as helm enchants go. However, you may not be able to acquire one with good stats on day 1 of the league, so you may just want to wait till day 2, but it's not really that important either way. This build utilizes gem swaps for our main skill, which is something that not many builds do, but for those who don't understand what that means is that while we're clearing maps, we're using Freezing Pulse totems in our main gem link, and then once we get to bosses, we either swap out Freezing Pulse for Ice Spear, or we swap out Freezing Pulse and a couple of other support gems to have an even stronger Ice Spear setup. And whether you do swap one gem or you swap three is going to depend on whether you're getting to a map boss or whether you're getting to Conquerors or Cirrus, right? So when you get to Cirrus, you can swap all three gems out. I'm just going to go through that right now. So the two gems that we keep in pretty much every link, Cold Penetration and increased crit damage support. When you're running a 6-link, you can add added cold damage to the as the third gem that you're never swapping. These three gems are used in both setups, and they're kind of the best gems that we have available in these setups. I'm also assuming that we only have access to 3 off-colors. It's very unlikely in a league start situation that we're going to have access to more off-colors, and it's also very hard to calculate at the moment prior to PoB being updated for 3.15 exactly what gems are going to be ideal, but these are the ones that I presume are the best given some calculations I've done based on the patch notes. So those are the 3 gems you're always going to keep. Then you're basically going to be able to run Hypothermia and increased crit strikes, and you can swap Freezing Pulse for Ice Spear. When you get to Conquerors, however, you're going to be swapping Hypothermia and your crit strikes out for greater multiple projectiles and elemental focus in conjunction with Ice Spear. This gives you a much better bossing setup by quite a large margin, whereas this is much better for clearing. In particular, the reason we run Hypothermia here and Elemental Focus here is because you don't really get to freeze bosses, and so the extra bonus from Terran's Shiver as well as the defensive components of freezing don't really matter, and Elemental Focus is a much stronger gem, whereas while we are clearing, we absolutely do care about chilling and freezing mobs, and we're also going to benefit greatly from the Terran's Shiver mod, where enemies frozen by you take 20% increased damage. So that explains why we use these different gem setups. The reason, in case anyone's wondering why we use GMP and Ice Spear and not Freezing Pulse, is because Ice Spear can shotgun with additional projectiles, whereas Freezing Pulse cannot, and so greater multiple projectiles ends up adding quite a lot of extra damage to Ice Spear. As you can see here, where adding it gives us about 33% more damage, so it's a really big multiplier to our damage. We want it in there. So the most important utility setup that we're going to talk about is the one that goes in a weapon, and the reason this goes in a weapon is because it's the only setup that can really benefit a great deal from having a 5th link in it, and that is our Wave of Conviction totems. So we run this particular combination of support gems for a very specific reason, and that is that by running multiple totem support here, we're able to get out a 5th and a 6th totem, allowing us to benefit from Ritual of Awakening's 5% more damage per summoned totem. We don't want to use multiple totem support in our main links because that's going to take up a support gem slot, which is going to give us a lower damage multiplier overall and decrease our DPS compared to just running another support gem. We still do want the 5th and 6th totem out, however, for the sake of that ascendancy node. So we run a utility totem setup where we can get the 5th and 6th totem out as Wave of Conviction totems, and then by putting added cold damage here, if you go to the calc section, you'll see that Wave of Conviction is going to deal cold damage primarily rather than fire or lightning as it typically does, and that's going to give us cold exposure pretty much with 100% uptime against bosses. The 5th link you're going to add in here is Culling Strike. Now, an alternative to doing this is to simply cut one of the Vortex gems off and put Culling Strike there in the meantime. The problem is that Vortex has a bit of a cooldown and it requires you being in melee range of the boss, which you may not always want to be. So you can add Culling Strike in there for the time being, but once you get access to a 5th link via stuff, this is the ideal setup that you want to run. But, you know, if you don't have it, just slap Culling Strike on your Vortex and you're good to go. Now, other than that, we have 3 falling setups that we can run in pretty much any slot. So the first one is going to be Sniper's Mark, Val Haste, and Val Righteous Fire, all combined to be supported with an increased duration support. This means that you don't have to reapply Sniper's Mark all the time. It's going to have something like a 16-second duration. Hopefully you're only going to have to cast it once per boss. Val Haste and Val Righteous Fire are going to last approximately 6 seconds, which is going to line up with your flasks a little better and give you this really nice solid damage window where you're doing a lot of increased damage to bosses. The next setup is the Vortex setup. We want to run Vortex, Bone Chill, increased duration, and increased area of effect. The reason we do this like this is because we then put Vortex on the left mouse click button where it doesn't interrupt movement in order to cast, since it's an instant cast spell. It's going to force Chilled Ground onto the floor, and that's going to cause bosses to take 14 to 16% more damage from your other skills, which is really, really strong. It's a lot of free damage to get, and especially with the support gem nerfs, we really need to run something like this. Increased area of effect support basically just makes it easier to apply this effect to bosses without having to get too close, and increased duration support is because even though it has a 1 second cooldown when fully leveled up, not every vortex is going to be touching the boss, so it's nice to kind of paint an area with vortexes and then have a bunch of them sort of linger around, so that the boss is most likely always going to be on shield ground. The final setup that we're going to run is Flame Dash linked to Arcane Surge, and that's going to be in a 2-link, and then we're going to have a separate 2-link with Cast on Death Portal. We don't want to put Second Wind on Flame Dash anymore because it's going to increase the cooldown even further. Flame Dash has been nerfed, so has Second Wind, so I don't suspect they're going to go good together. And Arcane Surge has been nerfed a little bit as well. It's no longer going to give us increased cast speed, which is kind of going to hurt, but that's not really that big a deal. And then Cast on Death Portal is because basically this is a softcore build. You're going to die a bunch of times, and it's nice to just have a sort of checkpoint that gets you right back into the map. When you are doing deliriums, blights, all sorts of mechanics like that, which, you know, basically give you less rewards if you're unable to complete them, then having the ability to jump straight back into a map after death is going to increase your loot per hour effectively. It's very important. It also means you don't have to worry about, you know, long run backs if you die to a boss at the end of a map, stuff like that. This will cut down a lot of time, and it basically, this setup allows it to be worth it running softcore builds that die on occasion, because dying doesn't have this huge penalty of having to deal with a 20-second run back. We have a couple of directions that we can take the build in once we're ready to put more money into it, and whilst the price tags to these builds start at about 25x, I wouldn't say that you need to save up that much money before you begin doing these builds. You can pretty much work towards them progressively by buying the upgrades bit by bit, and you'll notice quite a bit of increased damage as you work towards them. So the first suggestion that I have is the mid-range tanky totems. I'll just pull up the PoB for that real quick. So that's basically utilizing the Viridi's Veil in conjunction with Coward's Legacy. And so by doing this setup, you're basically becoming hexproof via your helmet, and that frees up your ring slots, although it only frees up one ring slot effectively, as the other ring slot needs to be a magic ring. Although this here, it says it's rare, but it should be magic. And then you get an Essence Worm, and the Essence Worm can be used to obtain Hatred. Hatred is a large damage multiplier, and then with Coward's Legacy, we are able to then run permanent low life with Pain Attunement. This gives us a lot of increased damage, but it also gives us some other extra defensive benefits. So in this version of the build, we're going to run Enduring Composure, and we're going to drop our permanent endurance charges here to pick up Sanctuary of Thought. And by doing this, we can basically benefit from endurance charges with an improved Immortal Core. Now, with the typical Conviction of Power setup, Mortal Core doesn't really work as well for us, since we are unable to consume our endurance charges since they're basically permanent. With this build, we can consume our endurance charges, and then as a result, we can juice up our Immortal Core to provide massive amounts of damage reduction. And on top of that, Viridi's Veil is also giving us it's making the damage that we receive from enemies unlucky. And what that means is that whenever we take damage from an enemy, that damage is rolled twice, and the lower amount of damage is what we take, which is a huge defensive mechanism on its own. There aren't too many other changes here, mostly just adding a Watcher's Day and Cluster Jewels. There is a better explanation of the Cluster Jewels in the guide. I'm not going to go through them here. And then for the offensive version of the build, it's basically it's a completely alternative direction to take the build, where we run our Curse Immunity via Atziri's Reflection. Now, doing this frees up both our rings, where we can take Hatred and Zealotry as well. And on top of that, we also run the Arden's Anguish Belt. Now, the Arden's Anguish Belt is converting our permanent endurance charges into brutal charges, and brutal charges give us a healthy chance to deal triple damage with our abilities. And as you can see, this is a really nice combination of damage multipliers that gets us to 29 million damage. Now, we're also adding in, mind you, Militant Faith here for Inner Conviction, because we're running 5 power charges permanently, and this is basically 15% more DPS when you take it, which is a really nice damage multiplier that we don't have to invest very much in to acquire. The tree's a little more fleshed out, of course, but the build isn't without its defenses. It's still running Mind Over Matter, it's still running decent amounts of life and energy shield here. It's about 7k HP total, which is still not bad at all, but 29 million boss damage is pretty incredible, and I've done the Feared and the Hidden with this setup, and it was pretty easy enough, providing you don't just get nuked randomly by a Cheola, but, you know, that's pretty much easy enough to avoid as long as you know what you're looking out for. And yeah, so these are the kind of 2 alternate directions you can take the build in from here. You don't have to upgrade the totem build into either of these versions. You can pretty much just use the budget version of the build to start funding any other build that you want to play. Totems aren't the fastest build to be farming maps with in the endgame, but there are a lot of people who like totems, and so I decided I was going to provide 2 alternate versions to sort of take the build in, a tankier version and a more DPS orientated version. Totally up to you which one you want to use, and there are more in-depth descriptions in my actual guide that sort of explain what you're doing. And then there's a god tier setup for each of these, where you can essentially reach 67 million DPS with the Arn's Anguish version of the totems. I haven't personally run this, but I've spoken to someone who had a gear very similar to this, and you can basically kill pretty much any boss in the game virtually instantly with this. It's pretty incredible. So if that's something you're interested in as a pure bossing setup, it's something that you may want to pursue. I've provided the PoBs for it in my guide. So the last thing I wanted to talk about is the weighted sum searches that I've provided in my forum guide. You're going to have to access the forum guide in order to use this feature, but I would really highly recommend it because it is going to save you a lot of time and a lot of money when you're looking for weapon upgrades eventually. And the way this has basically worked is I took a bunch of different PoB setups, I simulated a bunch of different ones with varying amounts of all these stats, and then figured out weightings for them that are all approximations. Now, this can't be done exactly because different amounts of multipliers interacting with each other are going to produce different results, and especially for different PoB setups, but it will provide you with a rough guide to buying new weapon upgrades. And all you're going to do is basically click on these links, and you can customize them further depending on how you want. Now, these links are all searching for ones only. You may want to search for different other different types of weapons, maybe set it to a staff or a scepter or something like that. But the gist of it is that you'll set a minimum amount in your weighted sum here, and then it's going to list all the weapons according to price for that sum. And basically, that's going to give you the cheapest weapon upgrades up to a certain amount of DPS. Now, I really would recommend testing the ones yourself before you actually buy them. So for example, what you would do is you would hover over the trade listing here and click on this button that has the plus symbol. You would open up your PoB, and then what you're going to do is Control V to paste, and then add to build. And then from here, you can see that equipping this weapon is going to provide us with 21.5% more DPS. Now, just to show you some other examples, say we wanted to search for some more expensive weapons. Here we're doing a 615 weighted sum. This is going to produce much more expensive weapons, but much stronger weapons. So we click on the plus symbol here, and then we would Control V, add to build, and this weapon is going to provide us with 51% more DPS compared to the 21% DPS we were getting from the cheaper weapons. So this tool basically allows you to search according to the DPS increase of your weapon, and the reason why this is very useful is because typically people price their weapons based on certain stats such as +1 level to skill gems and whatnot, but there are going to be situations where there are weapons that are incredibly strong for our build that don't have a combination of stats that people consider valuable, and as a result they underprice these weapons. You can live search with the weighted sums as well, and that's going to allow you to snag some very powerful weapon upgrades for yourself for a much lower amount of money than what they should be worth if the person was aware of how valuable they were to our Freezing Pulse builds. But again, I really would suggest simulating these for yourself in your own PoB, just because some weapons may appear to be stronger than they actually are, and particularly if you're looking up +2 weapons. +2 weapons are worth far more than what the sum appears for them. There's no way for me to manually tell this system to add extra weighting if it has +1 level to all cold skill gems and +1 level to all spell skill gems. I can't do that, so you're basically just going to have to know for yourself that you're going to have to do manual testing and figure out, say you decide you want to spend, say you have a budget of 10 exalts, you're going to look up a certain thing and then say, okay, well, you can use this weapon or this weapon, and so we've already copied this weapon, and now we'll do this weapon as well. We'll paste this in, and we can see that a Maelstrom Spire is going to add 50%, 51%, and the Ghoul Branch is going to add 50.6%. So in this case, we've bought the cheaper weapon. We're going to buy the cheaper weapon and save 3 exalts, and it's also going to be the stronger weapon. And yeah, this is basically a really important and powerful feature. I would recommend, using weighted sums for all your builds, but not every build can utilize this as well as Freezing Pulse can, so just make sure you use this if you're looking for weapon upgrades and you want to invest deeper into your totems, as it's been pretty invaluable for my own testing, and I can't imagine a situation where you're going to be upgrading your weapons in a league start situation and just doing it on your own rather than using this. Just wanted to wrap things up by reminding everyone that the resources for this video are in the description below the video. That includes the leveling commentary and the forum guide, as well as a couple of other things. If you have any questions at all concerning this build or any of the other builds that I provide resources for, feel free to hit me up on stream. Starting with the day of the league start, I'm going to be back to my normal streaming schedule of 7 days a week, and I think for the first week or two I may even be doing degen hours. I'm probably not going to be doing PoB reviews at the launch of the league, but after the first week or so I'll be back to doing PoB reviews, so feel free to hit me up with any requests that you have. You don't have to be subbed, of course, I just do them for absolutely anyone. And beyond that, I'm just going to leave you guys with some gameplay footage. The gameplay footage you're about to see is the build at a 10 exalt level of investment. I didn't want to invest any more in the build because I felt that that might misrepresent the capabilities of the build. Obviously, any build can clear maps and bosses nicely if you invest a mirror into it, so I thought 10 exalts was a kind of reasonable level of investment to sort of show off the capabilities of the build. That's something that even beginners can work towards without, having to spend more than a week at most. But most of you veterans are going to be able to hit that level of investment by about day 2 of the league. Hopefully I'll catch most of you boys on stream in the upcoming league. If you found this video helpful, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. If you didn't find it helpful, then feel free to flame me in the comments section. Have a good one for now.
The others found strength in their projection. They became reliant.
Watch beauty crumble! Glorious praise! Pointless! Radar star!
Interesting enough to warrant all this.
This city is nothing!